All right, continuing on, for this section of our module, we're going to be discussing the 10 rules of a good assembly when dealing with our multimedia presentation. So these 10 rules for good assembly, they are rules that have been taken from a discipline that is known as instructional design. So instructional design deals with how we create images and how we utilize basically multimedia via audio, video, or graphics to convey our thoughts and information, basically in a manner that our audience is able to get the full effect or understand it. So there are many books that have been written about this particular topic, instructional design, and the rules that I'm going to review with you today are rules that I've selected that I feel are the most important to the topic that we're discussing. So I just wanted to let you know that I didn't make them up myself. They're actually things that people have been incorporating for years. So rule one is you always want to use a light background and a dark text. So if you look here, you want to avoid using a dark background and dark text. If you have to remember, you are usually given a presentation. Sometimes you're in a room that maybe the lights have been dimmed. So you're actually the only thing that's illuminating the room and then needs that white background or that light background to give it some light. And you want to use dark text. Now, if you use a dark background and dark text, it just makes it harder for people to actually read the information that's on the screen. You also want to avoid using colors that tend to blend. Like even though these colors look really nice together, they're very similar and they can blend in together. Again, you got to think about how your audience may be at a distance and they may not be able to see everything because it's starting to look all like one jumbled slide on your presentation. Now, rule number two, you don't want to use too many graphics or sounds. That information is important because if you're using all this animation and you have all this audio playing, I'm competing now against this audio. So the user or the person in the audience can't hear what I'm saying because now I have claps going on, or I have all this basically noise on the screen, and the user can't see or they can't hear or receive what I'm trying to communicate with them because I have all this distraction on the screen. Now, I know that PowerPoint and Keynote does give you so many different tools for graphics options and sounds. However, it doesn't mean you have to use all of them on one side. You just have to be conservative and use them where you feel it's really truly needed or it's going to convey the point you're trying to make. Now for rule number three, you don't want to center your bulleted list. If you look here, you see everything has been centered. We actually don't read like that, especially on the Western. We actually read from left to right. You want to make sure your bulleted lists are actually lined up or with a left alignment because your eye gradually will go ahead and read from left to right. We don't read from right to left, or we don't read information centered. Our eye automatically flows to the left and then we read across to the right. So that's another thing. You want to make sure that you actually are using bulleted lists that are aligned to the left. Rule number four, you want to place graphics off centered when possible. Every time you put a graphic right there in the middle of the screen, it may actually look better if you just move it a little bit to the right or to the left so that the information can flow a little bit easier. Instead of having to make the text surround that graphic, you can make the text actually align to the left or to the right and put the graphic a little bit to the side. You don't want it to be right in the center. So for rule number five, you want to use basically a sans serif font. They're much easier to read, especially when they're being projected. And you want to try to avoid using a serif font like this one, because serif fonts makes the print more difficult to discern when you're looking at it from a far distance. The serif fonts, they actually have these little hooks that's on the actual text, and it's easier to read maybe on a document, but you have to think about now you're projecting and you want to make sure that it's easier for people to read from a far distance. So take that in consideration when you are actually selecting the font that you're going to use when you do your presentations. Now, rule number 6 is something that a lot of people underestimate. You want to keep the font size at least at an 18-point font. So this right here is actually 18-point font, and you notice that it's already kind of small. It's already a little bit small to read depending on what you're trying to convey. So if you do anything less than 18, like for instance, this is 16-point font, it makes it very difficult to read. This is a 14-point font. See how it's getting smaller and smaller, and I'm projecting right now. And then you also have what's up down here from the rear. Imagine somebody reading this 12-point font. And then if you even get all the way down to a 10-point font, think about just how hard it is for that person to actually see what you're projecting out and what you're going to be doing. You want for the user to be able to read your effort and your work that you put on the screen. So you want to keep at least an 18-point font, but if you need to, you can go higher. So rule number 7, you don't want to put more than 6 bullet points on one page. Too many makes the slide too cluttered. If I was to put all this information on the screen, I'm expecting the user to read all of it, or I'm going to have to review all of them. You can make it flow a little different. And what I would probably do is cut this in half, and I would bring half of this over to the other side so that I can have two different columns of bullet points, or I would create another slide and put those bullet points on a different column. So you don't want to keep too much on one screen when you're doing bulleted items. And you have to remember our eyes or our brain connects typically with about 6 to 7 digits or numbers or points. We can only take in so much at a time before we have to transition to something different or get a break. So you don't want to put too much information on the screen and the user can't comprehend or grasp everything you're trying to do because just too much on one screen. Now for rule number 8, you want to keep the bullet text simple and concise. Now for here, we have basically somebody, and I'm pretty sure you guys have seen a presentation and somebody's put nothing but paragraphs of information on the slide, and there's only a few things that could be happening. Typically, the person that's giving that presentation, they're expecting you to read all of that information that's on the slide, or it could be that the person that's giving that presentation hasn't properly prepared for their presentation. So what they're doing is they're going to read all their information to you. So they're looking at the screen to read the presentation to you. You are disconnected because you're not hearing everything they're saying anymore because they're actually not paying attention to the audience. So it's not a good format. You don't want to put paragraphs of information. You want to do something more like this format where you break it down. You want to use like maybe a smart art, or if you want to do a bullet point, and I'm going to just slowly bring in my points of topics that I want to talk about. So I will bring in the first 1.1 hours of lecture, and then I will begin to talk about it more because you're giving a presentation. You're actually giving the presentation. You're supposed to present the content. You're not supposed to just put all the content on the screen. You have to interact with the presentation. So I would just keep bringing in different items, and I will talk a little bit more about the information, and I'll keep going, and that engages the audience. You want to make sure you're constantly engaging your audience and not just reading a whole bunch of things to them. So rule number 9 is pretty obvious. You want to avoid all caps. A lot of people already probably know that every time you type in all caps, it's taken as though you're yelling at somebody. You don't want to feel like you're yelling at your audience, and your audience is not going to want to feel like you're yelling at them. Plus, it makes it very difficult to focus on and read because everything is all at the same level. And so people can't see that break and they're not sure where or when things are supposed to stop. You just can't read that information good because it's in all caps. It's not a good format when you're doing your PowerPoint presentations. And the final rule, which is rule number 10, you don't want to overuse animation and transitions. Again, I know that people get excited when they start using PowerPoint and it seems so fun and they just want to play with all these nice animations that they can bring in, but it can be overwhelming to the user. It's could be seen as noise or a distraction when you put too much animation or too many transitions in your PowerPoint presentation. So you can put some in. You just want to be careful not to overuse it. It does make the presentation come together when you have a little bit of animation and you do transitions and they're nice and smooth, but you don't want to overdo it. So next, I want you guys to go ahead and proceed to the next part of this module. Again, if anybody has any questions, you know you can always send me an email.